Hello guys, and I welcome each and every one of you to a new episode in our journey into learning C++. Uh, Today we're gonna learn two basic things in programming. One of them is reading inputs from the keyboard. We have to specify only from the keyboard. I got my coffee here. Classic among programmers to get a coffee while they're programming in the morning, and even though I record this clip at 2 and 10 minutes p.m. It's still considered morning for programmers. Until it's not 6 p.m., it's still morning for us. And after the 6 p.m., we grabbed a good night coffee. Okay, so jumping into the action. I said we're gonna learn today two things. First of all is, how to read input from keyboard. Very important from keyboard, because you can also read input from files or other sources, but we're gonna start with the keyboard because it's the easiest one, and we're gonna learn the if statement. It's very simple, it's very basic, it's very logical and according to the real life. It is also called a conditional statement. And short things short. Basically, in programming, if something is happening, then we do something else, we do something else. You're gonna see it's very simple, and it's very matching on how humans think, because we invented programming. Let's be serious. I'm sorry if you hear my nose. I'm a bit sick, only a bit. It's because of the coffee. So we're gonna start with reading. Um, One important thing to mention: if you're in Visual Studio, you're gonna read a bit different from me. Not in the state of writing the code, but in the state of how you input the. I'm gonna explain it to you. So we wanna read from keyboard, right? We learned last episodes that to display something, we use. Of course, we don't have the using namespace as standard. If you wanna write something in the console, we have cout. I am writing something. Don't forget the comma. And if we run the program, it's gonna output I'm writing something. Cool. But what if we wanna read something? Well, reading and writing is pretty similar. What do I mean? Instead of writing cout less, we write cin, because things are coming in, not going out. Hi, like the opposite of the parentheses. And we can just read something. We need a variable to store our value that we read. So we declare a variable, and if you remember from the last episode how we declare a variable, I'm gonna give you a couple of seconds to do it alone. I want you to declare a variable, an integer type of variable that doesn't have a floating point. Okay, that's an integer. You simply do that by writing int, and you just name your variable how you want. My variable. Okay, now we can read from keyboard, and if we write cin my variable, we're gonna read something from the keyboard and assign it to the variable my variable. And now if we output it, we can output my variable. So now there are two things to talk about. One, if you're using Visual Studio, how you do that? You simply run the program, and a console is gonna show up, and you just input your number and press enter. The program will stop running until you enter a value and press enter, okay? If you're using the online compiler like I do, you just go here to input and put it here, 5, for example. But Visual Studio, how to read variables. Let me show you. A console is gonna show up. Studio C++ console application. A console like that is gonna show up, and you have to type it and press enter. Okay? It's look, a console like that. Just press 5 if you want to have the same output as me, and press enter. Okay? Now, if I run my program, surprise, surprise, it's gonna output 5. Well, why? Well, because I inputted 5. If I input 12, it's gonna output 12. Brilliant. So reading stuff from the keyboard is easy. But what happens if I input something like I love bread? Who doesn't? And we see that I love bread is not an integer, is a string, right? And our variable is int. What's gonna happen? Let's see. It gives us an error. I mean, it doesn't, but it's not an error, but it outputs 0. It doesn't output what text we entered. In Visual Studio, actually, it might give you an error, not gonna lie, but I think in this online compiler, it doesn't for some reason. And usually, you want to match your input type to your variable type. I can store strings into an int. If I want to input that, I have to make my variable string type, right? And just run it. And you see, it outputs I, only I. And why? Because in this compiler, spacing it's considered as another string, but I think in Visual Studio it's gonna take the entire. For example, if I write I love bread, it's gonna output it as I love bread. And if I want to put some spaces, I think in this compiler I have to write like this, I love bread, maybe. I'm not sure how this compiler works. It's better to use Visual Studio. Oh, it's only I, and okay, apparently the space is considered a new string for some reason, which in Visual Studio shouldn't be, but if you declare a variable string and input I love bread, the output should be I love bread, not I. I think this compiler is pretty bad. So you've learned how to read a variable. Interesting. And you've learned how to assign it to an already declared variable. Okay. You can input any type of variables. For example, I can go for a float number and say my float, and on the input I will 7.32, and it should okay, maybe it's like that. I don't know. I was not declared in this scope. Oh, it's because I changed the name to my float, but here I'm still trying to read the variable called my variable, and I'm outputting my variable, so he doesn't find my variable because I haven't declared it anywhere. For it to be used on the future program, you have to declare it first. That's why I'm getting an error. All I have to do is replace my variable with my float right here, and it's gonna run, and I'm pretty sure that it's point, not a comma. I mean, I think it's called a comma. Yeah, 7.32, as you can see. Good. Now, reading is pretty easy. It's pretty standard. Nothing very complicated. It's just seeing instead of cout, and parentheses are opposite direction. Okay, so now let's learn about the if statement. So as you can see, the if statement looks like this. If condition, and we open parentheses, just like main has. That means everything that's between those, it's in this if. Do something else. Do something else. What happens? You write here a condition. For example, let's say we have an int x. We read an x, scene x, and if. Now you have to remember the operators. X, it's greater than 10, then let's say we output greater than 10. Else we output less than 10. So how does this code gets executed? It's very simple. He evaluates the expression. He asks himself, is x greater than 10? Oh well, he is. So he's gonna execute this part of code in the first brackets. And he will skip the else part. So if this part is executed, he won't execute the else part, okay? If x isn't greater than 10, he won't execute this part and he will execute this part. It's very according to human logic. So if this is happening, do that, else do this instead. You could have this else part missing. For example, you can write it like that. If x greater than 10, cout greater than 10. And if this is false, you won't do anything because there is no else. Okay? You often see it like that. You often see it with else. It depends on your needs. Okay? So let's input 9. 9 is less than 10, so it should output less than 10. So only this executed because x is less than 10 and he will go less than 10. He won't execute this part. And if we write 15, he's gonna say it's greater than 10. But what happens if we have 10? Is x greater than 10? Is 10 greater than 10? No. So we go to less than 10, even though the sentence is not real because 10 is not less than 10, but that's how we wrote it. You see? We should have say something like greater or equal, less or equal to 10. And now our code technically works properly, but it didn't affect the if statement, just we were dumb enough to. Okay, so this is how you write the if else statement. You can write it like that, and if I input 5, you will say that it isn't greater than 10, so this doesn't get executed, and we don't have an else, so nothing gets executed, so we didn't output anything, right? We can't have only an else though, so if there is an else without an if, it gives us an error. What we can do is write the if else into ifs. For example, if x greater than 10, cout greater than 10. If x less than 10, cout less than 10. And this is another variant of writing it with two ifs instead of an if else, but you just wouldn't do something like that because it doesn't make any sense. I mean, it does technically, but you can just write it in an if else statement. So I hope you understood that. It's quite simple for a programmer to explain what an if statement does, but I think for some persons it's really hard to understand. If you have any questions, please leave it in the comments below, or join my Discord if you want me to assist you with a problem that you faced. I will be really happy to do that. And for the next time, if you want to practice this thing, I'm having an exercise for you. So try to practice with this thing. Read a number from the keyboard, and if the number is how do we, let's see, if the number is greater than 100, output yes, otherwise output no. That's a good exercise to practice. And try this. Read a number from the keyboard, and if the number is greater than 5, output, I wrote output output, yes, output yes. And the third exercise, read a number from the keyboard, and if his if the number multiplied by 3 is less than 50, output less, otherwise output higher. I don't know, output whatever you want. Try to practice with these exercises, especially with the third one. Remember that in the if, you can, in the parentheses of the if, where you write the condition, you can write anything. For example, if 10 plus 10 equals 20, for example, and he will, yes, and he will output if this is true. It is true, and we didn't use any variable. We can say something like if 30 times 3 equals 90, and so on, if 50 plus 50 is less than 200, and it will work. So until the next time, try to practice with those exercises, and if you struggle, leave a comment or contact me on Discord. Thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to leave a like if you consider that this video helped you, and subscribe for the future episodes. Thanks everyone for watching, and see you next time.